Welcome to the Andrew Holland Podcast, where we explore the stories of successful people, get insight and advice from individuals who have accomplished amazing things, and dive deep into understanding ourselves as human beings. Now, here's your host, Andrew Holland.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Andrew Holland Podcast. We have Carrie Masters, the CEO of St. Joseph the Worker, joining us today. Carrie, thank you so much for being in studio today.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
So tell us about St. Joseph the Worker. You know, your background is, you and I were talking about it when we were preparing for the podcast, nothing less than a miracle.
Oh, thank you.
And when I learned about St. Joseph the Worker and what they do, basically helping economically disadvantaged and homeless individuals gainfully get employment by giving them the tools. And I just connected your background, the passion there. So get us started. How did you get involved with St. Joseph the Worker? But more important, give us your backstory.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I always get stuck because there's so many pieces to my story. I'm like, where do I start with my backstory? But I think I got to go all the way back because it's really what connects me to St. Joseph the Worker, SJW. So Arizona native parents. My mom is a native. My dad was from Missouri. But otherwise whole family natives. Parents were both addicted to drugs pretty heavily and got married really early. My mom was 17 when they married and when she had me. So young mom, my dad was 22, young dad. But drug addicted parents. And so we lived 14 years of poverty and homelessness, in and out of the UMOM shelter here in the Valley. We would bounce between like abandoned trailers and houses, sometimes apartments, and all the above. But essentially, we were housing insecure primarily most of my childhood. And then my dad went to prison when I think I was 10. I think I was 10 or 11. So then mom became single mom of 4 kids and was extremely mentally ill, but we didn't know it because of how heavy her addiction was. So we had a mom that couldn't even take care of herself, really. And so I was very, what, the kids call it now, I was very woke from an early age. And so I always kind of knew what was going on, and we're really mature for my age.
Were you the oldest of the 4 siblings?
Oldest of the 4.
You were the oldest. Okay.
And just, I guess, just really hyper aware of everything. So I'm going to speed up the story. My mom leaves in the middle of the night when I was 14 years old, and she never comes back. And reminding you, dad's in prison. We were living in Sunny Slope in an apartment at the time, and could not afford to turn on the electricity, but we did have running water. So I wake up and there's a letter with our birth certificates, social security cards, and food stamps, which were paper at the time. And essentially she told me she couldn't take care of us anymore, and that she wasn't coming back. Here's all the essentials, and to call 911. And I knew that if I called 911, I was going to be separated from my siblings, and those were my babies. So I was like, I got this. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, and I'm going to take care of them. At that point, I had dropped out of school. I was in 8th grade. I don't think I went one day of 8th grade, actually, now that I think about it, because I needed to take care of my siblings.
So you go to bed one night.
Yes.
And you wake up,
Mm-hmm.
and your mom's gone.
Yes.
You had no idea. She gave no indication. She just fled in the night.
Yes, exactly. Yep. I think it is super shocking, hearing you repeat it. But when I say it, I'm like, what do you mean? That's no big deal. But yeah, there was no forewarning. I think we had been through, me and my siblings had been through so much trauma by that point that those kind of things just aren't shocking, right? Like tons of sexual abuse and physical abuse for all 4 of us. My parents were, my dad would beat the crap out of my mom constantly, obviously in and out of homelessness, um, just a lot of things that most people don't ever witness, and we just kind of happen to endure and witness most of all of it.
Did you
Um,
ever see them off of drugs as
ooh,
normal humans and what their dispositions were?
kind of. Um, I think so. So I would say maybe like maybe first, second grade would be what I would consider the most, maybe the only two normal-ish years I remember. They were not using meth at that time. They had overcome a cocaine addiction a few years prior to that. They were heavy, heavy weed smokers. So that never went away, but we're just going to pretend that, they they acted normal to me on weed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they were heavy drug dealers. So even in that 2 years where it felt more air quotes normal, we still had a lot of the like traffic.
They
And
were actually dealing.
yeah, absolutely. Matter of fact, we had I think it was our freezer. I hope I'm not butchering this. Mind you, I was in elementary school,
Yeah.
but it was had my dad would weigh out all the bags of weed. I can't even believe I'm saying this, Andrew. And he would like stack them in the refrigerator and like spray something on them. I have no idea. But the refrigerator had like money and weed in it. And me and my sister would play house, and we would get the green styrofoam out of the fake plants, especially like back in the 80s.
Yep.
And we would crumble it in baggies because we're selling weed to each other. That's normal, right? Like that's what you're so we would literally sell fake bags of weed to each other while we played house when
And
we're
you didn't know
little.
any different.
No, it wasn't
Different league.
until like the DARE program in elementary school that came out. And I remember I was devastated walking home from school that day. I was like, I felt like I have a bone to pick with my parents, right? Like they're bad.
Yeah.
But before that, it was totally normal. But so yeah, there was a couple years in there that I think were normal, and I was very small at the time, but it feels like maybe they were normal. But outside of that, no, there was no normalcy there
Yeah.
at all.
So your mom flees in the night. You're wise enough at this point, like you said, 14, to realize if I call 911, Child Protective Services
Mhm.
is going to get involved and we're going to be split apart as a family.
Mhm.
And you didn't want that. And you
Right.
basically became a mom at 14.
Yeah, I think I was born a mom. I think I was born a mom, Andrew. I think my earliest memories, I was always protecting and ensuring that my kids, my siblings were cared for. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? You have food, you have water, you have your medication. I'm changing your diapers. I mean, um, I was chit-chatting with my second to youngest brother. Hope I'm saying that right. And he was my baby. Um, he had severe asthma, and the ambulance would come all the time because my parents are cracked out, and they can't they didn't know how to care for us. No electricity, you can't plug in your breathing machine, all that stuff. He had been hit by a car multiple times sneaking out in the middle of the night while he was 2, in a diaper, and just crazy stuff with him. But I would take him with me to sleepovers. I would literally pack a diaper bag when he was from 6 months until you know until forever.
Yeah.
Um, and he would spend the night. That was like the condition. And I just think back on that sometimes, and I think, I don't know if the parents of the friend that let me do that were saints, or if they were maybe ignoring like something that needed attention, right?
Mhm.
Like it's like this weird thing. But
Yeah.
at the time I was like, I get to bring my baby with me. Um, so I have a really unique uh upbringing, I guess.
So what happens? You're 14.
Yeah.
How do you survive 14 to 18?
Mhm.
You're 14. You can't legally bind yourself to any
Mhm.
contract. Like, how do you function on a day-to-day basis? You drop out of school.
Mhm.
How do you provide for your siblings? Like, walk us through how
Yeah.
that's even possible.
It's not. I will say that. I thought it was, and it is absolutely not. We went through the majority of the day, like I'm mom, you know. So I get to be the boss. Well, of course, like my little brothers, who were 4 and 6 at the time, and my sister was 12. Brother's cool. Sister? Yeah, right. You are not the mom. I get to do and be wild. So she made my life, in a sister way. I packed my brothers up in a shopping cart, took the paper food stamps, and we walked. The fries is still there. There's a lot of connection there. Anyways, in Sunny Slope, it was about a mile, and bought a ton of junk food, right? Like kid stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Munched, did all that, and then eventually realized like my sister wasn't listening. It's getting dark. Like I don't like how do I do this again? Like food stamps are almost gone. So I went to a payphone and I called my grandma Collect, and she, long story short, but she said she couldn't basically hang up and call 911. Like I can't take care of you. And I'm like, okay, that's not an option. So I kind of like festered a little. And then I went back and I called my grandpa Collect, and in the most calm, loving way was just like, okay, honey, like I'll be there in 30 minutes. Be ready. And he was there. He brought the truck and he loaded our entire life up in that truck, got guardianship of us. He went to the prison, got my dad to sign over his rights, hiked. No, not hiked. I didn't know this until later, went back to the apartment and waited every day because he was like, my mom's eventually going to come back and see. Took her 31 days to come back. But he did that because he wanted her to sign over the rights so he could get us in school. And, so he did. Guardian angel for sure. In a lot of ways, there's a lot of things that my grandpa did for me growing up. But then me and my 2 brothers moved in with him. My sister moved in with my aunt and uncle. And then I stayed from 14 to 18, which was my junior year of high school. And then I got my own apartment and stayed in high school like everybody else and graduated the next year and all that. And then my dad got out of prison when I was 18. So my sister and my 2 brothers went back to live with my dad. And then my dad's single dad until he died a couple months ago.
This podcast is all about, or we talk a lot about business and we talk a lot about entrepreneurship, but more importantly, the point and the focus is, anytime you think you're going through something challenging, somebody has had it far worse. And for you to come from that to where you are now as the CEO of St. Joseph the Worker is why I started and said this is nothing short of a miracle. And I think the motivation that maybe you don't even realize that you give me and that you give our listeners and that you give everybody hearing your story, which I'm so thankful you're willing to share, because some people want to hide from that. Some people want to hide from the past, and because it's not couth to say in society that my parents were drug addicted, or that this happened, or I made mistakes, or they made mistakes. And that's the point of life is, secularly speaking, well, even religiously speaking, failure and getting back on the horse. And so I just want to say thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And we haven't even gotten into so many of the details that you and I have discussed, again, in preparation for this, about what it's been like with your siblings, having to take that parental role at such an early age. Before we jump into that, and then I really want to pick your brain on mindset and the human element to all of this and how other people can utilize your experiences and the wisdom you've gained from them to help them either get out of a similar situation. And you're better to speak on this, obviously, than I am. But back then, I feel like the level of resources compared to now are like night and day, thankfully.
Totally.
So we fast forward.
Yep.
You're 18. You get
Yeah.
your own apartment. Take us now to today, just briefly.
Okay. 18, own apartment, working full time, graduate high school. 2 months later, get my first boyfriend, first everything, get pregnant, become a mama. I'm going to speed through this one as fast as I can. Left him when I was 5 months pregnant. He was extremely physically abusive to me, amongst other things. And So I knew that I wanted completely opposite of whatever I ever experienced in my life for my baby. So I left. So 5 months pregnant, becoming a single mom, and working. Had to put college on hold, even though that was one of my dreams. Because I'm like, how am I going to support this baby? Obviously, I have no family to rely on. And I worked. So found responded to a Craigslist ad. Oh my gosh. When I was 22, um, at LGE Design Build, and for a receptionist role. Started there and worked there for 20 years. Started off as receptionist, then over the years went from that to executive assistant to the owner, human resources director, office manager, chief administrative officer. I'm probably skipping a handful of them, but eventually chief operating officer. And then a handful of years before I left, was privately owned just by Dave. And I had been there with him forever. He and I are very close in age, and we essentially grew that thing from this tiny little mom and pop shop. I think there was like 17 of us when we started. We grew up to probably like 30, 35. 2008 hit, and we went down to like 11.
And what was your primary business there?
At
At LGE
LGE.
Design Build, just for our listeners.
Okay, it's a general construction company,
Okay.
commercial. Subcontracted all the work. And yeah, so he approached me, and he was like, we were at this really pivotal moment where we were like, we're ready to build a new headquarters and show off who we really are. We were growing in staff, growing in revenue. We wanted, we had been throwing around the idea of like starting our own architecture company, because we're like, man, paying all these fees out to architecture. Let's just do it ourselves, right? So anyways, I bought in. I had to take a loan out because I, didn't have the money, but I took a loan out, bought in, became part owner of LGE Design Build and COO. We did design and build our own headquarters, and then we also started an architecture firm in 2014, LGE Design Group. Grew that. When I left, I think we were at like 22 staff between here and Texas, and like $6 million revenue. LGE, I think when I left when I left, it was booming, and we had like a $350 million sort of like what we budgeted. And we were like, holy crap, I think we could get close to like 6. So I don't really know where they landed eventually, but I'm sure they did really well. But when I started, we were like a little $20 million company. And so then we had architecture, and I was COO and partner of that because we started it together. So it was like, I didn't have to buy into something that we did together.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm like partner and COO of these two really awesome organizations. LG had grown at this point to about 120 staff between 3 states. We had Chicago, Texas, and Arizona.
Where was Dave from?
Dave's native.
Oh, native
He's
of
from
Arizona.
here.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And then creation came about. So for many years, Dave was doing developments on the side, and I was just the doer, right? Like he was the brain, and I was just make everything happen. And he decided to make that official with another partner of his, and started a development firm, which I also was partner in. We started that in 2019, and COO of that company. It's ridiculous. I think when I left, they were worth like 1.6, 1.8 billion. I think maybe we had 15 in staff, multiple states. It was much more than construction. We were investing in soccer teams, all over the world. And we have restaurants, Mora and the Americano with Scott Conan as our celebrity chef. I mean, we were doing crazy things, 2 private jets, and just a crazy life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did that, and was very successful at it. I learned so much. It's a male dominated industry, and growing up in it, having started so young, um, you know, I realized how important having thick skin is for a woman in a male dominated industry. Um, and also how important it is to bring a little bit of that womanly flair to a really hardcore group of men. And it actually worked out really well. And the culture was awesome. And I miss the people still, and love construction and everything it's about. And it will always and forever be a large piece of my heart. Um, but then that takes me to St. Joseph the Worker. I left LGE in, now I have to think about it. This is 2024.
Yep. Time flies when you're having
July.
fun, doesn't it?
So I started St. Joseph the Worker. I'm sorry, I'm processing this out loud, in March of 23. So I left LGE in July of 22.
And why did you leave? I mean, you're on top of the world.
Yes.
I'm still sitting here in awe, just hearing your beginning story to where you went, private jets.
It's crazy.
It's such a fantastical story that people, if Carrie and I weren't talking, would say you made that up. But the reality is, when you put your mind to something, and last week, have you ever read the book Think and Grow Rich?
Yes.
One of the best business books out there.
Yep.
And it is clear to me that you utilized every single one of the steps of that book. You have an EQ like very few people can attain to accomplish what you have accomplished. And the reason that's so motivating is it can be done. People keep thinking that the impossible is impossible,
Right.
but you are living proof that that is not the case. So what ultimately led you to really step down from on top of the world, for lack of a better term, and go into the nonprofit organization St. Joseph the Worker? And did you sell out of LGE? Are you still an owner? Give us some background there.
Gosh, so there's so many things I want to say to this, but you talking to me in the beginning about just entrepreneurship and success and the loneliness behind it. I first want to say that while most would perceive me to be on top of the world, because yes, there was nothing that I needed or wanted, and I felt like almost in a dream. Like, how in the heck is this me? And I have these things, and I have a beautiful home, in Scottsdale, and I was driving vehicles, and
you had
you just
it all in quotes, in air quotes,
fathom, right? But I was so lonely. I just felt like unfulfilled. Like, I had all these accolades and accomplishments and things and stuff, and I just felt like so empty. Like just from a relationship, friendship, all of the above, like when you're that engulfed in your work and you have that many successful businesses all at once, it's really, really hard to open yourself up to any type of relationship, whether it's an intimate one or a friendship or anything. So it's almost like I put those things on pause for 20 years. And so I found myself where my daughter's grown, she's 23. I'm like, I'm single, I have no friends. And like, I actually have no idea what I enjoy in life. Like, I've never walked my dogs at 10 in the morning on a weekday. I've not really vacationed. I don't know that I've ever like stopped to smell a flower on a walk. Like, my life has been engulfed in real estate and construction for so long. And I just felt really overwhelmed with emotion and like sadness and like confusion of like, how does one on paper have it all, but like have nothing at the same time?
Was COVID integral in that feeling when you were away from the office and away from everybody? Because I don't know if you guys were going to the office, or do you think it was just, that just happened to be a coincidental, huge global experience that was occurring, but you were trending down this path of emotional emptiness regardless of whether that would have hit or not.
Yeah, I think I was trending that way regardless. Oddly enough, with COVID, LGE, we stayed open. We were able to distance and follow all the rules and whatever. So weren't, and we were booming in construction from it. It was the total opposite. So it was crazy madness. But I think it was more, it had probably been marinating and festering with me for about 5 years.
Okay.
And I would open up to Dave, the current owner, and still a dear friend of mine. And just, I didn't know how to explain it because I didn't know what it was, but I would always tell him, like, I don't know what brings me joy, because people would ask me that all the time. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know how to answer that question. And I felt kind of, and he's a man's man times man's man 10. Okay. Like, dictator, no empathy, like he's meant for his job. Right. So he was so sweet in that he would listen, but he of course had no idea what I was going through, or even how to communicate that. So long story short,
and he would probably, if he was sitting right here, he'd say, she was telling me these things. I had no idea what she was talking about.
He probably didn't even connect how intense those feelings were. I had a life coach who I love and I'm so thankful for. I was doing hypnosis therapy. I have a life coach. I still go to her, that kind of touches. It's like a professional coach, but sort of encompasses all areas of your world, which is why I call her my life coach. I was, going to counseling. I had all these things trying to figure it out, because I knew something was missing. They were all kind of telling me the same thing without saying it, which is like, your whole being, your whole everything is screaming at you that you're not where you're supposed to be. You gotta just do it. And I didn't know how. And I had nobody, right? Like, no friends. I don't have a spouse or a boyfriend. I don't have family that I can fall back on if I F it up. So I felt like here I am in this like really crazy moment in my life where I could stay and just keep doing what I'm doing and live the way I was, or I needed to make a change and I just didn't know how to do it. And I was so scared of failure. I was like, what if I do this and I fail and I'm working at McDonald's or something? And like, so I made a plan.
Fear takes you to a very scary place. Yeah.
So you know what I did? I had to accept my greatest fear, which is like, I lose everything. And then what do you do? So I was like, okay, if I lose everything, I will be okay if I had to work at McDonald's, and then I'll work my way up, and then I'll become a manager, and then I'll learn the ins and outs of the operations, and then I'm going to buy a McDonald's. So I literally figured out a plan of like, if I fall all the way back down to the bottom, how can I work my way back up? And then I was like, got it.
It's not so bad once you face it, is it?
Yeah. You're like, oh,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right?
I've been there multiple times. And that's the thing, until someone's been there, it sounds like Dave is a highly accomplished individual.
Yes.
And he maybe perhaps has not experienced some of the finer things, more important things in terms of that emotional side.
Right.
And we all probably at some point in our life, especially if, and I know nothing about Dave or the background that he had, but you had already experienced true trauma. But there are a lot of people that go through life and they hit 40, 45. Sure, they have some failures, success and failures, but they've never had real emotional trauma. And so when someone comes to them, how are they going to have a clue? But everybody eventually. They're either lying or hiding from it, and it will rear its ugly head at some point.
Yeah.
Or it's on their roadmap. They just haven't gotten there.
Totally.
And the beauty in that, and I think you can speak more knowledgeably to this than so many people, is the incredible contentness that comes with that realization and facing your fear in the face, really.
Yep.
And then confronting it and moving past it and making a decision. Talk to us about once you made that decision, how you communicated it, and what that looked like.
Okay, this one, you're going to be kind of probably stunned on this one. I feel like I need to touch a little bit on Dave and I. He and I, so I'm 43. He's 2 years older than I am. So you think back, here I am in my early 20s. So is he. And so his dad started the company. And so he was working for his dad. And his dad passed away in, I think it was 2012. But his dad was pretty much retired. So he's like, son, and he didn't quite say it this way, but like, you either take it and do something with it or I'm done with it kind of thing, right? So Dave and I grew up together doing it. So the closeness, right? Like, we had the same friends. We hung out on the weekends. We were together all the time. So that, like, you get on each other's nerves feeling.
Oh,
And then you really are, there is no shame at all. Like, you know, let me get that booger hanging out your nose type
exactly.
feeling. You get the comfort. So I feel like
it's a blessing and a curse.
Yes. So I feel like I needed to share that because we did have this unbelievably close relationship. And thankfully we did, because it's what allowed us to go grow and set these organizations up for success, was that we always had each other to fall back on. And we instilled confidence in each other nonstop. So it was like, without, you know, with each other, we always had the confidence that we needed to succeed. So I say all that, and I'm so thankful for him. And clearly, I would not have been able to accomplish the things within LGE without the opportunity. And so he gave me that opportunity. And so I love him for that. But we started to grow apart. And I think a really important piece of partnership, and even a COO and a COO, a CEO and a COO, that relationship is so important that the alignment needs to be there constantly. And I think because here I am in my world feeling empty and lost and unsure of, like, you know, what I want to do and be it, and then him so passionate and money driven, of like, Dave is very targeted. He's always wants more. Like, there's never going to be a place that's good enough of like, okay, now we can stop. And I was in a very different place and mindset where I'm more about nurturing people and not maybe as money driven. And so the way that I make decisions was different. And so then when it got to a space, we started to bump heads. And he's dictator style, and we're really comfortable. So then it's like, telling you what to do. And I'm like, no, you're not. And so we kind of got in this weird space in our relationship. And I kind of just told myself, we got in a little squabble one day, and I really disliked how I felt when I got home that day. And I just kind of felt like, man, if I were dealing with this in any other aspect of my life, I would leave. Like, I wouldn't stick around in it. Like, you know, and I've been wanting to go. And so I made a commitment to myself. If this happens again, I'm leaving. And 30 days later, it did. So it was not planned necessarily. I was not ready to leave. My heart was still fully there. I had zero game plan on what was next. I just knew that if I hit rock bottom, I would be okay. But no game plan. I had no converse. I did nothing. We had a conversation that just there was just no alignment within that conversation. It was going nowhere. And the words flew out of my mouth. And then I heard myself say it, and I'm like, oh, okay, here we are. This is what we're doing. And so I told him, you know, that I was leaving, and that I would like him to please buy me out of the businesses. At that point in time, I was partner in 3. And then I had also started the David R. Sellers Foundation with him after his dad passed, to do charitable work. And so I had all these commitments. I was a one-man show with that. And so I said, you know, I want to be bought out, all these things. Here's my exit. Here's all the stuff I want. And I'll continue running the David R. Sellers Foundation throughout the end of the year. I don't want any pay for it. I want nothing for it. I just want to be able to fulfill the commitments that I, you know, gave my word on. And he agreed. He agreed to everything. There was no mess there. He obviously tried to get me to stay. Extremely stunned by it.
Should he have been?
No, I don't think so. But I think we were so, by that point, I think we were like two just like kind of angry best friends, you know? and neither one of us wanted to be the vulnerable one. So we never really got to have a very fruitful, in-depth conversation with the emotion involved in it. And I'm not talking about like, oh, we're going to bawl our eyeballs out and this and that, but I'm just talking about the vulnerability behind it.
Mhm.
So we still communicate and here and there, and we just, not by my choosing, but the conversation's just avoided. I would love, and maybe he'll get to see this, but I would love for him to know, right, that it was, um, he knows it wasn't planned. I don't think he knew how much of internal turmoil I had been going through, and how that once really close, tight knit relationship, safe relationship that we had wasn't there. And so I didn't have the comfort and vulnerability to go to him, and say, I'm really struggling and like, here's what I'm going through. Because the truth is he would have supported me through it. And I know that. I just didn't do it.
And the reason I ask that, I think so many times any of us at various points in our life, whether personal or professional, can get so focused on, whether it's something material,
Mhm.
but something just not that important, that we miss the forest from the trees.
Mhm.
And, the reason why I ask, should he have been, is because if you can take a step back as wherever you are in your life,
Right.
a CEO, a parent, anything, those things, there are signs there.
Mhm.
And that's when you need to have those vulnerable conversations.
Right.
But if you're someone that's just a bull in a china shop going forward, and you don't take a step back to realize, my business partner is going through something right now, and perhaps I'm a part of that cause.
Mhm.
Let's have that conversation before it boils over. It will boil over.
Totally.
And that's ultimately what
Totally.
happened.
Yeah.
So you guys are still, friends is maybe too strong of a word,
Mhm.
but you guys created something incredible. I would
Mhm.
imagine if you guys got dinner and drinks, you guys could commiserate about the amazing things you created.
Totally.
And what I feel confident, and I'm curious your perspective on this, if he hasn't at some point in his life, he will experience something, I hope for him, and I hope this for everybody, where he'll take a look back, and maybe you guys will be able to have that
Yeah.
conversation, because he'll have experienced something in his
Mhm.
life that broke through that hardcore. I can say this as a man. We are pretty simple people.
Yeah.
We two basic needs. One is obvious. The other, we're kind of big animals that are very focused on, we don't have that motherly naturing, and I can only do one thing at a time,
Right.
period, end of story. And that has been, for me, learning as
Mhm.
the leader of an organization, as someone who is responsible for lots of people's families, when you're an employer,
Yeah.
understanding you have an obligation to
Mhm.
get past your genetic weaknesses or whatever it may be, to better understand when someone's going through something like that. And it sounds like you really instilled a culture at LG that was incredible.
I did. It's something that like I'm I'm still blown away by it. Um, but I've taken all the stuff, like the magic, um, and I've used it at St. Joseph the Worker, and it worked. So I know that I have the secret sauce,
Yeah.
right? Like I know that, and I knew, and Dave knew too. Like we knew, but you don't know until you've like,
Lost it.
yeah,
That's
and
exactly
then you
right.
get it back. Yeah,
Yeah.
like you're like, oh. So, and Dave and I, we do communicate. Like I said, we go to coffee about, I don't know. I think I was like looking back on it. We go on average, and it's totally unplanned, but it seems like he'll reach out to me about every 6 months, and we will go talk and we catch up. And it is exactly how what you would envision, right? Like there's some reminiscing, and then he's telling me all the crazy accomplishments that he's got going on with LGE. But there's just really never the vulnerability. And I agree with you that at some point maybe we will get there. And I do hope that for him. I always have wished for that. He's just a gem of a person, truly. Like the man is genius. There's so many great things about him. But you're right, when one little thing festers for too long and it's just not um approached the right way, it can mess things up. And for us, while I don't think it messed it up, I actually think it improved it for both of us. I think that was the perfect storm, and that I was meant to have LGE as my stepping stone. And you know, I think I needed that break from Dave. I think I had, this is me admitting something, I'm sure he knows this, because I had no family and nothing, he was everything. Like, and he meaning he and LGE, like his dad and his mom and him and his wife and his kids were mine. Like, that was, I'm like, what do you mean? Like, this is my, I felt so safe and vulnerable and protected, and like, you know, they're my family.
Yeah.
They just are. So it was not fair of me, probably, when you start, like, here I am putting this, like, you're my best friend, you're my family, you're my business partner, you're the CEO, you know, that I'm sure probably put a lot of weight on him, you know, and I went to him for everything. When I'm looking, you know, shopping for my first house, and, you know, every single thing that you would normally maybe go to your best friend, your spouse, your parents, maybe, that was Dave. And here he is, he's 2 years older than me. And I look back on that and I'm like, what a blessing. He was a kid too. So there's no hard feelings there. I love him, and I know he loves me. And I wish LGE and him and all of that, like, great success, and he'll have it because he's genius. And St. Joseph the Worker was meant to be next for me. So it was just the perfect thing.
How did you discover that? So you leave, this is July 2022 that you basically leave.
Yeah. So I the conversation happened in May of 2022. And I basically was like, I'll give indefinite notice. I just didn't want to set them up for failure, but I stayed until July. And then I just decided, like, I had a lot of healing that I needed to go through. When you're in a bubble of one place for so long, and they are your work, your family, your business, your everything, you almost have to relearn life again. And that sounds really odd, but I did. Like, I had to figure out who I was without LGE and Dave, and like how to make decisions without having somebody to bounce them off of. And I needed to figure out, like, why I was put here, like what was my purpose, and like what's next, and all these things. And I went through a myriad of things. I'm like, I love flipping houses and that kind of thing, but I'm like, I'm going to start my own little side gig, and I'm going to flip homes and, have some fun doing it. And then I'm like, okay, that is fun, but not when you're a one-man chick show. Like, and I don't want to take any relationships that I've built with LGE like that, So I'm like, okay, I don't know if I want to do that. So long story short, I traveled. I'm very excited to say I traveled. I did weird stuff, Andrew. Like,
and you had a daughter.
Yes.
And you guys got to spend time together.
It is the craziest thing. I kid you not. It was supposed to happen. And manifestation is real. That's one thing, positive thinking and all the other stuff. But so my daughter, she's 23, 22 at the time. She had gone to Scottsdale Community College, did about a year and a half, was uncertain of like what she really wanted, took a pause, worked, saved money, decided, okay, now I know what I want. She went back to school to become an esthetician, graduated the same month that I left LGE. And she had worked for an entire year and saved all her money. So she decided, I'm not going to start work right away. I'm going to take 3 months off, and I'm just going to hang out with my mom. So her and I both did not work, and we traveled. We went to, like, we just had never traveled before. So I was just picking random places. We went to Missouri, Branson. No idea why we went there. We just picked it. We flew, went there, had no game plan, loved it. Arkansas. We did Italy. We did Ireland. We did Chicago or Illinois, Mexico. The list goes on. There's probably many.
There's lots
but
of them.
Point is like, we traveled. I can't, it still boggles my mind to say that. Like, and I didn't have to take a laptop and work the entire time and stress on staff. And like, it was so cool. Um, but we traveled a lot. We would walk our dogs and like, we would go hiking. And I can't tell you the feeling, and I feel slightly embarrassed to admit it, but like the feeling that you get the first time you like stop when you're on a hike and you take in that deep breath and the smells and you're like, this is the most gorgeous, beautiful thing. And then just realizing that like I'd never really done that before.
You experienced life for the
Knew
first time in so
everything.
many different
Oh,
ways.
I was like cooking for my daughter. We were, you know, I was always a working single mom. So like I never had that opportunity and it was really cool to have it. So I just really enjoyed life for a while. Um, I went on a soul searching retreat in Colorado and did like hypnosis therapy, and a shaman came and like all this ridiculously crazy stuff, if I'm being honest. Okay.
Mhm.
But point is that it was an entire week of nothing but focused on myself and learning myself and what I'm supposed to do and be and like all that stuff. And it was fantastic. Um, I was like, I'm gonna go move. What I concluded I was gonna do, just so you know, I'm gonna retire and I'm gonna go live somewhere crazy like Arkansas or like whatever, on a lot of land. And I want to like have a garden and I just want to live simple. That's what I came up with.
Mhm.
And that's really, and I still sort of feel that on the inside. Feels a little sad that I would be doing that alone, but that's okay. I still dream about it. Um, so I did. I like got a realtor and I'm like, let's start looking in Missouri. Let's start looking in Arkansas. And we just started looking and I'm like, I'll sell my house. And, you know, just, I had 2 cars and just all this stuff. And, um, one of a relationship I had, a business relationship through LGE, called me one day. He's a board member of St. Joseph the Worker. And he goes, I know you left LGE. I have no idea what you're doing. Um, I sit on the board of this wonderful nonprofit. They're hiring a CEO, and I thought of you, and I wanted to know if you had any interest. And I'm like, and truth be told, I was like, oh hell no, man, I'm trying to be retired. Like, you know what I mean? I'm like,
I
the
don't want to work
pressure, like,
again.
what's
Yeah.
happening?
Yeah.
I'm living my best life. But I kind of researched it, and I was like, interesting that this nonprofit who works with individuals that have the same barriers as my family, even today, and just all the stuff. I was like, oh, this is so crazy. So I entertained a conversation, but admitted at that point, hey, listen, like, I don't want to manage people anymore. Like, I'm lost. I don't know why I was put on this planet. I was totally honest with them. And I'm like, I feel like I was like, I think I worked in that 20 years more than an average person works in their entire 65, years. It
Mhm.
was just a lot for me. And I just didn't want to do that again. So I said, no. I sit in this women only CEO roundtable. I've been in it for, I think, 4 years now. I go into my group and I open up and I'm crying and I'm like telling them, and I'm like, you guys, what if I just like passed up my purpose? Like, what if I said no? And one of the gals in there, she said, Carrie, if that's your purpose, it'll come back to you. Like, don't worry about it. And I'm like, okay. And I kind of just let it go. And I never thought of it again. And then 6 months later, St. Joseph the Worker reached back out to me. Um, Different board member, Rita, she asked me to coffee. And I thought that the way she had explained to me was like, I'm a CEO, you're a professional. Like, I just want to network with you. And I'm like,
Mhm.
absolutely, let's do it. And then she threw it on me in coffee of like, we still need a CEO. Have you found yourself yet? We'd love for you to, come in. And so I got really emotional. And I knew in that moment that, all right, I hear you. This is my next step.
Yeah.
And so that's what led me to St. Joseph the Worker.
One of the things I want to take a step back, and you said something that gives me a tremendous amount of respect and admiration for the relationship that you and Dave had. And it's, you said, I wanted this, 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 and he gave it all.
Mm-hmm.
Do you realize how much trust and respect he must have had for you,
Mm-hmm.
being that type A business negotiator type of
Mm-hmm.
personality, for him to do that?
Yeah.
That says a lot.
I know. It's going to make me cry. Um, because I know him, I knew, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We were both hurting.
Yeah.
And he did not want me to hurt anymore, and I didn't want him to hurt. So it was just like, we just wanted the best for each other.
Yeah.
And he knew how much. I mean, I was going to get LG tattooed on me. And the truth is, I still would. They're important to me.
Yeah.
But he knew, I knew. And I think, yeah, it's why there's just, are there things that I'm off at him about? Sure.
Anybody that's had
Like,
a business partner,
anybody you work with for 20
yeah,
years,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, the guy, I know we had a very close relationship that had every part of what that entails. And we did a lot of freaking fantastic things. But you're right. He did have, and I know that.
Without getting too much into details that aren't necessarily relevant, was the primary disagreement, and the reason I'm asking this is because this happens to a lot of business partners, where sometimes the best path forward to appreciate and admire what you've accomplished together, but go your separate ways, and depending on what it is. And obviously that's what it was for
Yeah.
you, and he's still done incredibly well.
God,
You've
yeah.
found a whole nother part of life that you wouldn't probably give the world for at this point. Was it the direction to take the company? Was it a cultural side of things? Give us some insight into how business partners, based on your experience, should know whether, you know what, it is that time.
Yeah.
Or whether, this is just a small disagreement we need to find our way through and
Yeah.
continue working together.
I think that's a really good question. I'm not sure that anything that Dave could have said or did would have changed the outcome, because I think that even in the times before we started to kind of squabble a little bit, I was already questioning my purpose and already trying to figure it out. And I was really scared of it because I'm like, I'm never leaving LGE, but I knew I just knew I was empty. And so I was like ignoring the obvious, which is what I had learned through a lot of therapy and coaching and all that, of like, I didn't want it to be that, but it was. And so I just kept ignoring it. And I was truly becoming, and this is another thing I think that isn't talked about often in our world, which is the physical health part of things when your mental health is not right. When you are overwhelmed and stressed out and you've got things going on, whether you believe so or not, your physical body is being impacted by it. And I was. And so I think, and my doctors were telling me too, right? So now I have my doctors kind of saying of like, you are working too much. Like at some point we don't want you as a patient if you're not going to listen to the advice we were giving. And it was not because Dave or anybody was making me do it. It was
You're motivated,
just
you're driven.
how life did things. But I think that what it boiled down to, and I think what you were going towards, of like how I had said, okay, if this happens again, like I this is it. And I think what it really boils down to is it goes back to that comfort. We were having business conversations with sibling comfort. And so the only way I can describe that to you is like,
isn't that a good thing?
And I don't want this to come out, and I just don't know what the right words to use.
Sure.
I guess in it is like, Dave had a way of, whether he was intentionally doing it or not, bullying me into being what he wanted. And I could only take that for so long. And it got to a point within the business where you might have been able to do that to me for 20 years with regard to these things. But on these set things, like, I'm broken as a human being, and like I can't do it.
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
That makes
So
100% sense.
it wasn't any malice intent on his part, and
Anybody who's gone through what you're experiencing at different levels
yeah,
knows exactly what you're describing. And if you don't, you haven't been there, and maybe you never will, and that's a
yeah,
blessing as well. But I think it also, I can relate to a number of business relationships
hmm
I've had that get to exactly what you're talking
hmm
about, and you grow from them and you
oh my
learn from
gosh,
them.
yeah,
And so they're a blessing and a curse, right? Just like so many things.
sure, yeah. Communication. I will just leave it with that. Communication to any relationship, partnership, work relation, whatever it is key. And I think that, um, it got to a space. Dave and I were like two peas in a pod for almost the entire 20 years, but we kind of grew it to a space where we were no longer two peas in a pod because it got too big. And
Yeah.
so I was maybe seeing him maybe once a month. And so when you aren't having
Mm-hmm.
that solid, consistent communication, things can break. And especially when your whole relationship, maybe the first 18 years was all it was.
Yeah.
And then when it goes away unintentionally, it was hard for us to figure out our new, like, what's our new form of communication. And the very little bit of time we do get to see each other and catch up, if there is a disagreement, the patience isn't there because we got to hurry up.
Yeah.
I got to get my next thing. And so I think it was just a perfect storm, like I said, but I would just, the biggest advice and what I carried with me after that is that I will force myself to have conversations immediately with important people in my life, regardless of how scary and uncomfortable that they are, because that's how important that they are to me and what I learned from that and moving forward.
Yeah, and I think to your point, and I think we all learn this as human beings, it only gets harder the longer you wait to
Mm-hmm.
have a conversation that needs to be had, whether personal, professional, or whatever it is. I want to ask you about something that you said, and I hear this frequently. Our society values materialism to such a large degree that people will commit atrocious crimes just to get money.
Mm-hmm.
But oftentimes, the least happy individuals in our society are those who have the most amount of material wealth. And they reach that epitome, they reach that top, and they get there. And I've heard this over and over. I've interviewed tons of entrepreneurs at this point, and I read voraciously on entrepreneurs' backstories. And you just look in society and you listen to interviews, and they get to that point where they have everything and they have nothing and they feel empty.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think we continue to perpetuate that same story over and over and over again?
To clarify, do you mean perpetuate the idea, the glamour that having all of the money and all that is super glamorous and
It's going to make you
stress
happy.
free and you're happy and all that?
Yeah.
I think it's a couple things. I think one, we don't talk about the rawness of this enough. And I know that coming from the business world, and I've always been kind of an open book. And so that world is, especially the guys, they were just kind of like, Carrie's being a girl again. So I think it's just not talked about enough. That's one thing. And then I think the other thing is you think about reality TV and social media and how glamorous they make that life look, and I can tell you with my daughter, when she was a teenager, it was when like YouTubing and like, you basically become a celebrity because you're just following somebody's life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she had this massive dream that she was going to get all these followers, right? And this whole thing. But she's a huge introvert and doesn't like to post on social media. So it was this thing where she was like, but I can do it. And so she attempted. I'm like, baby, you don't know unless you try, and hated it and was like, this is crazy. How do they do it? And it's like, they make it look a lot more glamorous than what you really see. I mean, if the world was getting up and painting the picture of reality, not very many people would be willing to take that leap, probably.
No, because it's a lot of work.
It's a lot.
I mean, it's
It's a lot.
It's a lot of work. You see the output, you don't see the input. And that's the same thing in business. you look at LG and you
Yeah.
look at what Dave has probably sacrificed and how hard he's worked, and he's got this. Look at you and what 20 years of work, 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 and you create incredible things and you have amazing memories, but that's part of the puzzle. It can't be the whole puzzle, right? But we
Right.
often make it the whole puzzle, and it always perplexes me because I hear this time, and I'll be the first to admit I'm very much like Dave, softer around the edges, I can tell, but only through hard experience and getting beat down and,
Right.
not being so foolish and stubborn and hard-headed as we men tend to be. But even though I hear these stories, I'm still that it doesn't it the ambition doesn't go away.
Right.
And that whether it's a measuring stick or whatever, it's just internal. And that goes to my next question. Why do you think some make it and others don't?
Mm. I, this is just an opinion, and I come up with it because I get asked often, like, how did I escape my background, but my siblings didn't? And I always, for years, I'm like, oh. But now that I'm older and I can kind of look at their journey and my journey and all that kind of stuff, I think we're born with it. So I think I had told you, like, I was woke. I truly can tell you, like, my I was one of my earliest memories. I was 2. I can't even believe I'm sharing this right now, but I'm just going for it. I was outside on my little tricycle, and a stranger danger came up to me, and my mom was inside, washing dishes or whatever. I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
pregnant, and he is. I still remember what he looks like and everything, but he's basically trying to tell me that he has a, and he wants to know if I have one, and I'm like, yeah, I do. And then he says, well, if I show you my, can you show me yours? And I say no, I'm not allowed to show my or something. And so we're having this conversation, and and my mom hears it and comes running out the door, and he, runs off. And my dad pulls up from work, gets out of the car, puts me on his shoulders, and he's like, is that him? Is that? And we're just running around the neighborhood, and my dad's like asking me, and I'm like, no, no, no. I tell you all that because even at that time, at that age, I knew. I knew that that was a stranger danger. I'm 2.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not even potty trained.
Yeah.
But, like, I remember that story. I remember feeling the discomfort in it. I just remember every part of my life and every phase feeling an extra level of awareness that other people didn't have. And as I was growing up, I thought it was weird because of it. As I got older, coaching and all therapy and all those things, I realized it's actually a gift, and that I'm not weird because I have it.
Mm-hmm.
I have a very deep empathy for people, but I also have like a deep awareness. I share that because my siblings don't. And so we just realized this. I took them, my dad died a couple months ago. I paid for a retreat, a cabin up on the Mongolian Rim in Pine, and I took my siblings weekend before last. First vacation we've ever been on in our entire lives together.
All 4 of you.
Yes. Ever.
Wow.
In our entire life.
I give you a lot of credit for being
It was
able
crazy.
to get all 4 to agree.
Yeah. And in the snow, none of us had ever seen snow, touched snow, driven in snow, played in it, none of that. It was a blast. But it was so cool. But I tell you that because we talked about it. And very self-admittedly, it was like, Carrie, like, we weren't woke. We just didn't have that level of awareness as kids. Like, they weren't impacted by some of the things that were happening around us, where they were able to, they didn't care if we had electricity or not, or if they had lice running around their hair. As long as they got to play and they did kid stuff, they were fine. Where I couldn't play. Like, I was like, I was so stressed and worried always as a kid about life and not being a kid, where they had that. And they, self-admittedly, like, there's a level of like drive that they just don't have, right? Like, my sis is like, I am not trying to work that hard. Like, I'm just like, I just kind of want to go and collect my check, and as long as it can cover X, Y, and Z, and I can be a mom, like, that's what I care about. My brother doesn't work at all. He's a drifter. He doesn't want a car or a house or an apartment. He doesn't want any, or he wants nothing other than, I just want to live my life my way. Some would consider him housing insecure or homeless. But he hates that term and is like drilled it in my heart and soul in the cabin that it's his choice.
It's his choice. It's his
and
decision.
It's like, so you have to know there's something we have to be born with, right? Like, I think that's my guess.
So I've said that all along on this podcast, and some people hate that that's the answer, but I will make it official based on what Carrie just said. It is clear, and I've talked to multiple entrepreneurs, Garth, who you know well. I've talked to so many people who work with these driven individuals. It's genetic. At the end of the day, there is something that we are born with, that drive, that passion. It goes back to what I was talking about, the ambition. Yeah, I know getting to the secular mountaintop of all this wealth and everything is not going to bring you happiness. Right. And quite frankly, godliness with contentment is great gain. Once you know that, that still doesn't take away the ambition, right, but you can put the ambition in the appropriate place within your life. If you don't, you're going to have to get to the mountaintop and realize you're missing a big piece.
Definitely.
So it's genetic. So my next question then is going to be, and if you follow me on Twitter, you can yell at me, you can yell at Carrie and disagree with us and prove us wrong. But the reason I'm always cautious about that is because then people can use that as an excuse. Yeah. Well, yeah, you were born with it and I wasn't. So, so if it is genetic, the people who don't have it, can't they just say, well, that's good for you, but you just happen to be born with it and I wasn't?
Is it something that you can teach, basically?
To a certain degree, yeah.
I think there's certain things that you can teach. I don't think you can teach ambition.
No.
So, good question, and one that I'm not even sure if I can totally answer it, because I can only go off of examples, and I'll use my family because they're my family, and if they get mad at me, it's okay. But I've definitely multiple times over my life attempted to do just that, right? Like, how can I teach them what I know? I've even let me furnish your apartment for you, so you don't have to, like, let me connect you to this job, let me buy that for you, let me eliminate your barriers. Crazy, I'm doing that with St. Joseph the Worker, but let me eliminate your barriers. You got it, right? And they don't do it. And it's not once or twice or 3 or 4 or 5. Like, it's just the pattern. And so what I've determined is, like, you have to want it for yourself regardless. If you want it for yourself, you'll be open to learning all the things you may not know to get there. But if you don't want it, no matter who is there to instill and teach, you're never going to get there. So I don't know.
And you can't really force someone to want it for themselves, right?
No. And I've tried. Like, I keep using my family. It's so funny. But my mom, she's in her, how old is my mom? She's 60. And she had very terrible teeth her whole life. And huge insecurity, couldn't close her mouth, all this stuff. And a few years ago, I decided, it just put on my heart, like, man, it must really like her parents didn't do it for her, like, had a rough life, everything. So I got her braces. She just got them off. But she didn't really, it was more my idea. And like, Mom, like, let me do this for you. She moaned and complained the entire 2 years the dang braces were on. She gets them off, and it's like, let me just complain nonstop about how much not only I hated the braces, but now this, and you know what I mean? And so there's not a level of appreciation there. And she didn't put forth the right energy, I guess is the right word, through that 2 years to take care of her teeth. So maybe she wouldn't be complaining at the end. You can't force it on somebody.
No. Carrie, you have been so open. This has been incredible. Before we leave, is there anything else that you want to share with our audience that we haven't already talked about, based about really any topic, where you've come from, what you
Mhm.
accomplished, or parting words of wisdom.
Yeah. I think I'll just kind of leave it with, where one thing that I've been festering on here recently and thinking about, and that's you only get one life. That's it. And it was my dad dying recently kind of put me in that space. Nobody's going to care about and maybe even remember your accolades, your accomplishments, what kind of car you drove, what brand of clothes you have, or even how much money you have in the bank. What they're going to remember you by and value is time. So for me, going into 2024, I am very focused on ensuring that I eliminate any of the focus that I have had on things that don't matter in life when I'm not here, and really focusing my time on giving authentic, genuine time, energy, and love to the people that I care about, and that's it. And so I'm slowly shedding a lot of the things, bad habits, um, and things that I learned in my 20-year journey in real estate that happens to be very flashy and like all those things, and slowly realizing that I really don't care about all that, but I do very much care about people, and I want to be remembered for good things and not about anything other than the impact that maybe I was able to make on somebody's life.
Yeah, you use the word authentic, and it's something that's just dying in our day and age in society. Just true, authentic, human to human conversation and interaction. Carrie, thank you so much. This has been incredible. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Andrew Holland Podcast. Never miss an episode by subscribing to and liking our YouTube channel, the Andrew Holland Podcast, and by following and liking the show on your favorite audio platforms. Be sure to connect with us on X, formerly Twitter, A Holland Podcast. That's A Holland Podcast, so you can interact with Andrew, the team, and our guests throughout the week. Thank you again so much for listening. Have a great day, and we'll talk again soon.